This is aisle 42. Thanks for listening to Aisle 42. In this episode, we chat with Mitchell Scott, CEO of Cult Food Science, to explore the cutting edge of cultivated and lab-grown foods. We dive into the promise and challenges of cellular agriculture, including cultivated meats, seafood, and innovative uses of mushroom-based proteins. Mitchell explains the science behind bioreactors, the regulatory and market hurdles, and the growing demand for ethical, sustainable protein alternatives. Throughout the conversation, Mitchell shares his passion for building a future of food that's delicious, safe, and environmentally sustainable. Okay, let's get into it with Mitchell from Cult Food Science, because the future of food starts now. Mitchell, we've circled each other for a long time now and finally able to connect and hit record, which is great. I'm glad we're doing this. To kick things off, my first question is this. What's one change in the food system that would excite you the most?
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show. It's been a pleasure, circling you over the years. For me, I think one thing I'm really, really excited about is cultivated or lab grown meat and all the kind of enabling technologies around that in the kind of cellular agriculture ecosphere. I just think they really have a ton of potential to transform our food system, to move us away from factory farming and all these destructive practices, but to still deliver products that are the exact same on a cellular level, that look the same, that taste the same, and hopefully very soon be at a price point where it's competitive, or cheaper than conventionally produced animal products.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say that. That's exactly what I thought you'd say. So you're bang on. But let's stay wide here before we drill down. And we got to nerd out on what is cellular agriculture, what is cultivated meat exactly. I think a lot of people feel like it's the dark arts, the voodoo of the meat and protein world and of the laboratory world. So maybe you can demystify this for us.
Yeah, to massively simplify, 10 years of science plus, you can take a chicken feather or a piece of DNA for an animal, a cell for milk or whatever. You can put it in this giant bioreactor. You can feed it nutrients, and after a few weeks, you can have a piece of meat. It's obviously much more complex than that, but that is kind of the premise of it. So it's going to look the same, it's going to taste the same, it's going to be identical on a cellular level, but you haven't raised and killed an animal to produce that piece of meat or that animal product. And it's not just kind of center of plate proteins and meats. There's dairy, even like honey and chocolate. So about 80% of the world's chocolate supply is under threat from global warming, deforestation. You've probably seen the cocoa prices have been skyrocketing lately. It's a very real threat that in 10 years there's no more chocolate that they could be produced on Earth. So product types like that as well, people are figuring out how to make them in a lab. And I think it absolutely sounds scary at first, but then you think, like, how are these products being produced currently? And you look at what's happening. Like, there's not a lot of happy cows out there, especially in North America. 95% plus of the meat is factory farmed. So if you look at the alternative of how meat, cheese, eggs, all these animal products are being made versus, let's make them in a sterile environment and be able to ensure that they're clean, that they're healthy, that these products are safe. I think it'll take some getting used to, but I think it's very compelling as a long-term solution to feed this kind of growing demand for protein, right? Where our meat demand is going to double in the next 30 years worldwide. And we just can't keep building more factory farms and really scaling this really inefficient and, disgusting practices, to be honest.
Okay, so bioreactor, that sounds a lot like my daughter's crafting table in Minecraft. So
Yeah.
what the heck is a bioreactor?
So it's essentially like it's just a big metal tank. It's a fancy way of saying big metal tank. They use them for brewing beer. It's got various pieces that are a part of that, but that's really just big stainless steel tank with some technology inside it that's going to help these products create these products.
So when you say it's growing meat, are we talking about sort of a sludge-like substance that then can be processed or kind of formed into something, or what is it growing?
It depends on what they're trying to grow. I think, there's a whole bunch of different applications. There's companies working on steaks. So, over time, these meat particles are going to start attaching to these kind of scaffolds and creating structure and form. But it absolutely does start out as a bit of some sort of wetter mix, and then gets structured and can get processed and turned into something more tangible.
It's fascinating. It really is. I think it was, I was hearing things back in the days around, it actually wasn't that long ago, where alternative proteins and, there's a lot of technology into insects. And obviously we know about pulse proteins and all these different ways and means that, sort of the natural world, without laboratory science can produce some of these alternatives. However, I like how you brought up this demand for animal products. When I think about places like Alberta, maybe politically or some sort of on an industry level, the idea of Canadian, beef being raised in Alberta, that makes sense to a lot of people that kind of get it. Well, I read a Globe and Mail article and it had some photographs of what some of these feedlots look like in southern Alberta, where they're just concrete pads in the open sun, where cows' lives are obviously really, really dire. And it's a very difficult place to manage all of the waste. And it just, that's not sustainable. We can't make parking lots full of cows and poop in order to make hamburgers and steaks. So when I think about some of the technologies you're referring to, I'm like, well, I get it. It does feel a little bit like the dark arts, but it's like, I get it.
Yeah, and I think that's a big part of the problem. Is like everyone loves this, or a lot of people love this idea of a happy cow. It's running in the grass, and then it has a great end of life and ends up as the best tasting burger they've ever had or whatever. But the reality is just that there's so much demand for protein in Canada and globally as well, that you can't replicate that happy cow on a farm and then also get it at a price point that that everyone's going to be able to pay, right? The government's already subsidizing these industries, and yet you still have kind of prices skyrocketing. So yeah, I think we need to figure out a new way to produce these products, that we have come to love. And I think cultivated meat is a part of that. I think plant-based protein has a role in that. I think a lot of the first products in the kind of cell egg cultivated meat space are going to be blends. So it's going to be maybe 90 to 95% plant-based protein, and then a little bit of cultivated meat or cultivated fat to just kind of level it up as a product, make it that much tastier, juicier, better. I think those are going to be some of the first products starting to hit the market. And you already see in places like Singapore, even in the US, there's products almost hitting the market either as tastings or limited releases. So I think it's going to come along sooner than we thought, but it's also, it's come a long way. 10 years ago, the first lab grown meat burger cost about 400,000 Canadian to make. That same company's making that same burger now for about 20 bucks. So it's an expensive burger still, but it's really come a long way. And I think it's going to continue to accelerate, over the coming years.
That's really interesting. So the some of the work you're the CEO of Cult Food Science. You're identifying and supporting startups that align with what you guys are doing in the cultivated food space. So what are you building there with that group? Like, why should investors and decision makers within the food value chain be paying attention to what you guys are up to?
Yeah, so I've been in the role at Cult Food Science, I guess a year and a half or so now. And, Cult was started about 4 years or so ago with this relatively simple idea. And that was that there's this exciting new area of food tech, which we've just been talking about for the past 10 minutes. So, cultivated or lab grown meat, precision fermentation, all under this kind of area of cellular agriculture. Over the past 5 years, private money has poured into the space. The three Bs are all invested: Bezos, Branson, Billy Boy Gates, and you've got some of the top VCs in the world are all putting money into this space. And our thought was, let's go and make a bunch of early stage bets on this space. So we raised 3 or 4 million, deployed that across 19 different portfolio companies, really looking for the most interesting, exciting companies in cell ag around the world at the time. Investing alongside some of these big names. And then we thought, let's take this VC fund, instead of just kind of sitting on it and waiting our 8 to 9 years. Let's go public with that vehicle and allow everyday investors exposure to this exciting new space. So that was the initial idea behind Cult. So public on the CSE, and that was great. And realized that we've got these investments, we're supporting our portfolio companies, helping them with PR, this that, but we're only minority owners. So we own usually 2 to 8% of these companies. So our thought was, how can we make more of an impact? How can we accelerate this transition towards a new way of producing products, of eating. So we started getting a bit more active in the space. We acquired a pet food brand that we're majority owners of. So we're kind of starting to actively operate that brand, leverage our portfolio companies' technology as ingredient suppliers, put that into the pet food, and really just try to I think a big piece of it is education. So educate people on what this space is, why they should pay attention to it, and just kind of start shifting our food system towards one that is more encompassing of these types of technologies and solutions.
And you must find yourself leaning into some of the policy stuff, the regulatory stuff, some of those market challenges. Dare I say it this way? You're probably on the bleeding edge of those conversations. What's that been like to navigate?
It's been interesting. You've seen, a big mixture kind of across the board. Singapore was very early with a lot of approvals, so a lot of companies set up, headquarters there. The US is a bit of a mixed bag. They've approved at the federal level. You've got a couple states have come out outright banning cultivated meat. There's legal challenges on both sides. We've done a bit of policy work. Wrote a few open letters, etc. And here in Canada, it's more like there's just isn't a ton of activity in the space as of yet. You've got a lot of companies funded out of the Silicon Valley, so they're going to focus on the U.S. market first in terms of regulatory. The states is building out this regulatory framework for that, whereas in Canada, it just kind of falls under their novel food ingredient pathway. So you've kind of got a 2-year process there that a lot of companies aren't, if they're based in the States or Singapore, they're not even going to bother going there to Canada yet because they're focused on the US first. It's such a huge market. It's going to take them 10, 20 years to even be able to produce enough product to meet that demand there. So it's been interesting kind of trying to figure out, where countries land, where different jurisdictions land, and kind of what is required to move it forward to get it, these types of products approved for sale.
And so often the innovation sort of journey is starts in Europe, goes to the US, and then eventually ends up in Canada, and we're all surprised. What's it been like on the cellular agriculture and cultivated meat, like in Europe? How are they responding to this technology?
So you have like a little bit mixed. Singapore was definitely like the first place where it was, one of the first places. You've got a lot of stuff in the Netherlands. There's a cultivated meat company that's selling pet food now out of the UK. Israel is a bit of a hub as well. So I think you have certain countries in Europe that are making advancements and kind of navigating these regulatory hurdles and trying to bring products to market. And then you also obviously have the US where a lot of the companies get funded out of and were started.
And let's talk about mushrooms for a second, because you have been making a mushroom product with a brand that a lot of people are sort of really taking notice of over the last, maybe it feels like the last 6 months. It's certainly getting a lot of traction. And I had one of your, was it your chorizo? Do I call it meatball? Am I allowed to use meat? Do I have to use air
Yeah, I don't
quotes?
know.
But it was a protein rich mushroom based ball. It was so good. It was delicious.
So yeah, so that's a company called the Better Butchers, and we started it, I guess, 3 years ago. And our initial focus there was cultivated or lab grown meat. We did a bunch of research, some partnerships with universities in Canada. We got a year or two into it, and we realized there's still so much work to do. We've got 2 or 3 plus more years of R&D, a couple years of regulatory. We're 5 or 6 years away from having a product on the market. What can we do in the meantime to build out sales and distribution, to build a customer base? And we were really interested in what is going on in the kind of mushroom protein world. So we found an ingredient. It's a blend of oyster mushrooms and pea protein. So kind of like a part mycelium type ingredient. So it's got a lot of the benefits of mushrooms in terms of high fiber, complete amino acid profile, and then it's got this really clean taste. So it doesn't have that pea protein aftertaste that you have to add a bunch of stuff to mask or to hide. So yeah, I mean, our head of product development came up with this incredible product, and we're like, wow, you know what? This is better than we thought. It's better than what else is out there, better than what we were finding down in the States on research trips. So we said, okay, let's launch it. And yeah, launched a year ago, kind of at CHFA. Chorizo, which you had natural and an Italian, and we are struggling to keep up with demand, so we can't make enough of it right now. So just trying to navigate that journey of scaling and growing and not growing too fast, and building that brand and that business. Longer term, would love to integrate cultivated meat and part mushroom, part cultivated meat. See that kind of hybrid product as I was speaking to earlier. But for now, we've got this what we think is this next generation of plant based products that super clean ingredient deck, high in protein, and more importantly, delicious and satiating.
And does the cultivated fat component, is that the same category as the meat? You have to wait just as long for that piece of the puzzle to be available? Because that seems like a wonderful solution to a lot of plant-based products that are typically kind of dry or like you talked about the pea protein. It's often like, oh, well, I like the spirit of it, but now I need 3 glasses of water to choke this thing down. And an actual fat would be a lot more enjoyable if that was worked into the product.
Yeah, so we've got a partnership with a cultivated fat company out of Canada. I think in some ways it's easier to create a cultivated fat than it is meat or at least a steak. But there's still scaling challenges, product formulation challenges, regulatory challenges. So maybe I was saying earlier it was going to take us 5 years. Maybe with this partnership we could do cultivated fat. I don't want to put a number on it, but maybe it's less. It's like 2 or 3. We're hoping to have prototypes this year of a blended mushroom. I don't know if it'll be a meatball or a burger, but a product, with this cultivated fat. But that's still just a prototype that we then have to refine and either take through regulatory, figure out, scale up all these different pieces. But I think yeah, it absolutely can solve a big piece of that dryness, some of that taste, concerns as well, and really just kind of make the product that much better so that people are actively going out and choosing it as their preferred protein for whatever, for tacos or for whatever their use cases. They actually like that more than the ground meat that they mix in the pan with the taco seasoning or whatever they normally do.
I remember it was in 2022, I was at Expo West in Anaheim at the big food trade show, and mushrooms were all the rage. People were making everything out of mushrooms. Mushrooms were in a bunch of stuff, and it felt early. It felt like, oh, I don't know if this mushroom is helping. And I remember trying for the third time in one day, I tried, yet again, another mushroom jerky. And it was just like,
I knew you were going to say
I
mushroom
know,
jerky because I was
because it was everywhere, right? Everyone was doing mushroom jerky. And after the third time, I'm like, you know what? My jaw is tired. Wasn't worth it. It was really unpleasant. But yet now there's so many more brands that are introducing higher quality mushrooms or mushroom formulations that are actually add texture, add flavor, and actually make the product better. So it's neat to see that evolution. So now when we see something that's a little unfamiliar, a little weird, or a little whatever, we can go, well, okay, it's early. Maybe it will get there.
Yeah, maybe it'll get refined. And I think a lot of companies, and this is just in food in general, and not even just startups, bigger companies as well, are putting out innovation that, at least to me, going out there as a potential consumer that loves the plant-based category and loves all these foods and stuff, isn't really hitting the mark in terms of taste and texture. And like, I'm so excited for it because it looks great, it ticks all these boxes, but then it's just under delivers from a product. And sure, you may, packaging looks good, you can get it on shelves, you'll get a bunch of people trying it, but if they're not coming back and buying every week, then it's tough to build a business around that. So for us, we're really focused on that product, that experience, and getting customers and building velocity, kind of going deep in our backyard first before, and troubleshooting any issues before we kind of go too far afield.
Yeah. Do you remember that Money's Mushrooms patty
I grew
that came
up
out?
on those. You put them in the toaster, you buy them at the, yeah, absolutely. They're kind of mushy and
Yeah, I worked at Earl's way back when I was a young lad, and they had it on the menu, and it was actually one of my favorite burgers. I would smother it in barbecue sauce, cheese, and bacon, just to be clear. But I actually really enjoyed the taste of it. Now, I don't remember ever looking at the ingredient deck. I maybe you've looked at that. That product's not even on the market anymore. But I remember the idea of eating a burger that wasn't beef, and it felt like an outlier. It felt like kind of woo-woo food. But nowadays, when people are standing at their A&W checkout, at the kiosk, or they're at really almost any restaurant, the demand for great tasting alternatives is there, and it feels like it's growing really quickly. Now, maybe it isn't growing as fast as everyone's thought it was going to grow at the grocery store, but when it comes to food service, I see it being very prevalent.
yeah, 100%. I think there's definitely a lot of hype, like, and Beyond and Impossible were first coming out. And I mean, they did grow massively. You went from whatever, like, 2% of the market to significantly more. But I don't think then all of a sudden all it takes is, a bit of a decline, and then, the big meat lobby jumps all over it and is saying, "Oh, plant-based is dead." But, like, what we're seeing is there's still strong demand, for good differentiated products, in retail, but also in food service. And, like, growing up, vegetarian and then vegan the past, whatever, 8 years, it used to be, you go into a restaurant and you're having fries or you're having a salad with no dressing. Now, almost every restaurant, even not just the chains like Earl's and Cactus Cup, but almost everyone has a really solid handful of plant-based options that are on their permanent menu, just because that demand there. And I think part of it is definitely a West Coast thing. I think there's, more of that kind of down the whole West Coast of BC, and also, in kind of Toronto area as well. But it's really been great to see that shift that's come about, I think, as a result of some of those breakthrough products kind of really just getting more and more people to have that positive first experience. Like when the Beyond Burger first hit A&W, it's all everyone was talking about, right? And then I'm sure that in the years prior, like I grew up eating not so great veggie burgers, and there was this huge stigma that, plant-based products are bad. So having these kind of breakthrough products that everyone's talking about that kind of are really good in terms of experience, and the way they're presented and delivered, I think opens people up to trying, maybe not cutting out meat entirely, but putting it into their rotation, doing a meatless Monday, just starting to eat more plant-based options in general.
And when I think about some of the areas that concern me the most in respect to sustainability and the environment and sort of the longevity of it, the seafood industry really concerns me. Obviously, we've got a lot of politics around farming, fish farming here on the West Coast, and the ocean can only provide us with so much. When we go back into the laboratory here, what's the future for seafood? Can we cultivate prawns? Can we cultivate fish meat? What can we do from that perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we've got a portfolio company that's the largest at the largest cultivated seafood producer in the world. So they merged two companies in the space. I think it's still early. You've had a few plant-based startups in the space that have kind of come and gone. You've got smaller producers that are doing things locally that are delivering really good kind of plant-based options. Save to Seafoods out of Victoria has some incredible products. I just launched some new tuna and stuff and spreads. But I think on a larger scale, in some cases, like from a cultivated meat standpoint, it's easier to cultivate fish just because of the type of meat it is. Like you're not. I think the hardest is definitely a steak with the marbling and the different layers and all that kind of stuff. Whereas I don't want to say anything's relatively straightforward, but I think within the next few years we're going to start seeing cultivated fish products hit the market, and them being very close to the real thing.
And certainly the safety of seafood is always, I love eating sushi, but I'm picky on who I buy my sushi from or where I go. And there are places now where, maybe I used to buy sushi there, but I don't anymore because you have one bad experience and it goes
Yeah.
south. But it kind of feels like, maybe to your point earlier around food safety, is actually one of the most interesting outcomes that could be produced out of the lab, where there's a lot more control, there's a lot more careful processes. And if the end product can handle distribution and processing and storage better, then it actually is quite the technology, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think there's absolutely the opportunity to during the production process tweak things, and it's significantly more sterile. Like you look at those feedlots you're talking about, they're covered in shit, they're getting pumped full of hormones, and it's not yeah, not a super sterile environment. So, yeah, I think all of these things can be done, and these products can be designed to tick these boxes to be more shelf stable. It's really just a matter of scaling, of hitting a price point that makes sense, and of educating consumers, like, how is it better that it's produced in a lab because it's cleaner, it's more sterile, it's this and that. And I think it's going to take a lot of time, and there'll be different adoption curves, and some people will be all over it. Some people will, not touch it until they see it at the local A&W.
Well, let's make that our last question then. How do we influence consumers' perceptions around this stuff? Alternative proteins, if it's based on a soybean or a fava bean, like that seems relatively simple in comparison to, something growing in a bioreactor. So how is the industry going to influence consumers?
Good question. I think, like for us, at the various companies that we're, the most important thing is just getting product in people's mouths and delivering that positive experience. So you can talk about it all you want. People are either going to listen or they're not. But if you can give them something delicious and they can be pleasantly surprised in a lot of cases. Oh, wow, that was plant based. It tasted just like this or that, and leave that positive impression with them, then that's going to influence their future decision making. They're going to be more open to these types of products in the future. So I would say keep putting out great products and getting as many people as possible to try them in different settings and formats and talk about why these are better, talk about the health benefits, the environmental benefits, obviously the ethical kind of benefits to the animals without beating someone over the head with it or being too preachy. I think that's always the fine line is how do you kind of talk about, why you're doing what you're doing and without kind of guilt tripping people.
Well, and I think for those that are ultimately concerned about animal welfare, if that's one of their primary concerns and why they choose the products that they do choose, I think this can be a really wonderful solution for that consumer. And you won't have to educate them very long. They'll get it really quickly. And those might be some of those early adopters. But I agree with you 100%. It's going to come down to, do people enjoy putting it in their mouth? Everything else after that, can come and go. But it's like, do they want it? Mitchell, thanks for this conversation. So good. So appreciate everything that you're doing and that your team is investing in so many innovative companies. It's been great to chat.
Perfect. Yep. Thanks so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Aisle 42. Please keep an eye out for their mushroom magic in the grocery store, not to be confused with magic mushrooms. And the next time someone on social rails against cultivated meat, be sure to tag in Mitchell or his team to set the record straight. Okay, that's it for me. I'm Corwin Hebert from Ethical Food Group, and I'll see you in the future.